U.S. President Joe Biden is throwing Israel under the bus as Iran is gunning for its proxies in Iraq and beyond to invade Israel, and the Northern Front with Iran's Hezbollah proxy is heating up. I'll have all of the details coming up on In Focus. Well, since last we met, a couple of pretty remarkably bad developments have taken place in Washington, D.C. The first thing is that the Biden administration has changed the order of events that it wants to see happening. Until Tuesday, the Biden administration was saying that any ceasefire, which of course they want desperately to happen, has to be contingent on Hamas's agreement to begin releasing the hostages that it's holding. They're holding 134 hostages. They refuse to divulge how many among those 134 hostages are alive and how many are dead. Right now, Israel assesses that around 90 or more of them are still alive. So we're talking about a significant number of people that we think are alive, but we don't know because we haven't received any signs of life. And before we start making deals with the people who are illegally holding them, the Hamas terrorists, we want to know how many of them are actually alive. Hamas refuses to give any of that information, and it's demanding a ceasefire as a condition for even discussing with us the release of our hostages. And the Americans, until now, as I said, were saying, well, we know you can't have a ceasefire until you agree to release the hostages. But beginning on Tuesday, both President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken changed the order. Now they want a ceasefire, and then we can start talking about the hostage release. Here, let's just watch a clip of President Biden discussing the issue.
Well, it's got to be a ceasefire. It's Ramadan. We get into a circumstance where this continues through Ramadan. Israel and Jerusalem could be very, very good. So we're trying hard for that ceasefire.
So again, this is a startling and alarming development because what it's saying is that the United States is just saying, just let Hamas win. Now, why are they doing this? How are they excusing it? They're saying, well, Ramadan, the Muslim holy month, is coming up on March 10th or so, and we need to have calm so that the Muslims in Gaza will be able to celebrate their holy month in peace. And the same goes for Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, etc. But the thing is that for Muslims, traditionally, Ramadan has been a month of jihad. For instance, Egypt and Syria invaded Israel on October 6, 1973, the Yom Kippur War. I think it was the first day of Ramadan, and numerous attacks against Israel have occurred during Ramadan, which is seen as a holy month, to be sure, but as a month of jihad. So when the United States is saying we want quiet for them to celebrate their month of Ramadan, they're ignoring the nature of Ramadan. Moreover, Hamas has already been inciting actively both its leadership in Qatar, which the United States enables to continue to sponsor and house in luxury all of Hamas's terror masters in Doha. So Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's external leader, right, he gave an interview on the media, I think a week ago, saying to the Muslims of Jerusalem, rise up and have jihad against Israel from Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. Let's see if we can get you that footage.
This is a call to our people in Jerusalem and West Bank and the occupied areas inside Israel to march toward Al-Aqsa Mosque from the first day of the holy month of Ramadan, in individuals and in groups, to pray and stay in it and to break the siege of it. We address the esteemed resistance forces in our nations who are now fighting their battle on many fronts in supporting of their brothers in Gaza to intensify their battle for Al-Aqsa. Jerusalem is the compass of this blessed axis, and on the way to it, martyrs are made.
The point here is that nobody in Hamas is looking at the month of Ramadan as a month of quiet, pensive prayer and fasting. They're looking at it as a month of stepped-up fighting. The same goes for incitement in Judea and Samaria, for the Palestinian Muslims of Judea and Samaria to rise up and commit October 7th-like massacres against Jews, both in Judea and Samaria and in the Shron district, in the Galilee, in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, and throughout, obviously, the rest of the country. So what we're talking about is a complete disconnect between the American message that we want Ramadan to be a month of peace and Hamas's message, which is that we want Ramadan to be a month of war. And in the crosshairs is Israel, where the United States is saying, let's let the people who are holding 134 hostages, and we don't know how many of them are alive, and they're not telling us, let's let them have a really great holiday, right? Let's let all of the people who support them in Judea and Samaria enjoy themselves. Let's empower them. Let's give them free access to Al-Aqsa Mosque, where they routinely riot and use as a stopping ground or stepping off ground to attack Israel. Let's do that. Let's essentially give Hamas the mantle of leadership over all of the Palestinians by enabling them to get what they want on Ramadan. You have to ceasefire. You can't continue your offensive operations against Hamas inside of Gaza. And then we'll see, maybe, that gesture of goodwill on your part is going to get some of the hostages released from Hamas's grip in Gaza. This is a very bad deal because essentially the Americans are saying, hey, Israel, we're done. All right, we're done. We want Hamas to win. This is what we're offering you. We're offering you to lose. And not only are we offering it, this is the second bad development. The other bad development is that today, on Wednesday morning, Reuters reported that the United States has changed the language of the draft resolution that they're putting before the UN Security Council. Until now, the United States has helpfully blocked a lot of very, very anti-Israel resolutions from going through the Security Council, but they had their own resolution, which was not very good for Israel either, but at least it said that a ceasefire can only go into effect when Hamas begins to release the hostages. That was an American demand, for instance, on February 29th. But that's no longer the case. According to the Reuters report, the United States is now changing the draft's wording to say exactly what President Biden, said in that clip that I showed you, and what Secretary of State Tony Blinken said ahead of his meeting on Tuesday with a Qatari leader, where they've changed the order. First, let's get a ceasefire, and then we'll try to release the hostages. So a ceasefire resolution at the UN Security Council stipulating that first you have to get a ceasefire, and only then can we talk about maybe getting some of the hostages released, when we don't even know how many among them are alive, would essentially be a diktat against Israel, say, you have to stop the war. Obviously, Hamas, like Hezbollah, like Iran, like all of these other rogue terrorist jihadist actors, they don't care what a UN Security Council resolution says. They breach them as a matter of course, whether it's the UN resolution that sets the terms for the nuclear deal that the Obama administration concluded with the Iranians in 2015 that only allowed them to enrich uranium up to 3.67% enrichment and only to limited quantities. Iran immediately just was in material breach of that, and now the UN is begging it essentially not to go beyond 60% enrichment rate for its uranium, which is just a stone's throw from weapons grade. And, Iran doesn't care. They're in breach of a Security Council resolution. Nobody cares. The resolution that brought the terms of the ceasefire to end Israel's war with Hezbollah in 2006, Resolution 1701, said that Hezbollah is not allowed to have any forces or weapons south of the Litani River, which at its most distant point is about 30 kilometers north of Israel, to keep Israel out of the range of Hezbollah's rockets. So who cares, right? I mean, Hezbollah is perched literally out at the gate, at the security fence, and we see them all the time patrolling there. They are in complete control, and every house in South Lebanon that was reconstructed since the 2006 war has a missile room inside of it, so that the entire area is completely armed, locked, and loaded to begin a massive assault of missiles and rockets against Israel. And we're talking about to the tune of 4,000, 5,000 missiles attacking Israel every day. And I'll get to that at the end of this conversation. But all of this is just to say these people never abide by Security Council resolutions. Who does abide by them? Oh, that would be Israel, right? That would be Israel. Israel abides by them to the letter. And so what the Americans are trying to do with the Security Council resolution for a ceasefire is actually to compel Israel to lose. That's what the terms that are now being discussed by the Americans involve. They involve Israel losing the war, Hamas remaining in charge of Rafah, being able to very quickly reconstitute its power throughout Gaza through the humanitarian aid that only it controls the flow of, because it's the only, since it's been in charge as a dictatorial force in Gaza since 2007, they continue to maintain law and order, right, as they're holding our women hostages as sex slaves, right? That's law and order for them under Islamic imperialist leadership. They continue to seize the aid. They continue to be responsible for distributing the aid. So everybody essentially lives at the mercy of these terrorists. So this is where we're standing now. This is what the situation is today. And the United States insists on making it worse. So first they say, reverse the order. And then they say, let's go to the Security Council, get a resolution to try to actually tie Israel's arms, to oblige it to no longer fight and to lose this war. That's what the United States is doing right now. And, what would you expect Iran's response to this American capitulation to its proxies to be? Well, obviously jubilation, right? Because it really worked. Like, wow, they sent Hamas terrorists into Israel along again with thousands of Palestinians joining them, right? And they slaughtered over 1,200 Israeli civilians and military, including children, elderly, women. They mass raped women, decapitated people, mutilated the bodies of their victims, just subjected to mass torture and humiliation and suffering as much as possible. They burned people to a crisp. We buried lumps of coal, right, instead of people, because that's what they were reduced to. It was a slow burn of the bodies at 4,000 degrees through this special fuel that they used in order to burn our victims, our loved ones. And they did this. Iran sent Hamas in to do this to Israel. They took 246 hostages, right, including children, babies. 2 of them are still being held there, women and men and soldiers and old men and everybody. And they're there, and we don't know what's happening with them, right? And they did all of this at Iran's behest with Iran's money, which, by the way, Senator Cruz pointed out that thanks to American non-enforcement of oil sanctions against Iran in contravention of American law, but whatever, by the Biden administration since 2021, Iran has gone from, I think it was 70 illegal fuel ships to over 400, and the disparity in that amount of money is billions and billions of dollars that the United States is enabling Iran to earn through these oil revenues, through these misbegotten oil revenues. That's what's paid for Hamas. That's what's paying for the Hezbollah rockets and their manpower and everything else. So the United States, literally, by not enforcing its own sanctions against Iran, is enabling Iran to fund all of this. So that's just another little wrinkle, right? But whatever the case may be, the point is that the United States is on Iran's side here, and it not only is Iran reacting with jubilation, but according to a report this morning in Israel's Yediot Ahronot newspaper, so it works out that Israel's security brass, and I know how highly I don't think of it, but all the same, they're warning that they're getting indicators that Iran is pushing its proxies, the Iraqi militia that have been attacking American forces from Iraq, and Afghan forces, because, of course, the Americans never wanted to acknowledge it, but the Taliban was sponsored as well by Iran, and a lot of Afghans live in Iran. They border one another, and there are a lot of Shiites there that work for the Iranians. And we've had Afghan jihadists controlled by Iran operating in Syria, for instance, and they've also been engaged in missile fire in some cases against Israel from Syria. So the Yediot report said that the IDF and I guess other security services are very concerned that Iran is trying to get the militias, its terror forces in Iraq and its terror forces from Afghanistan to begin attacking Israel. And they're talking about 2 forms of attacks. One is, from the air with drones and from missiles. coming from our eastern front across Jordan. And the other one is actually a ground invasion along the style of October 7th, where they would traverse Jordan, where they have a lot of supporters, right? A lot of supporters. Jordan King Abdullah II is supposed to be so moderate, not so moderate, okay? But there are a lot of Hamas. He's an occupier of Transjordan, of eastern land of Israel or Palestine. The vast majority of Jordanians are Palestinians, and he is a minority regime that was installed by British colonial authorities. His grandfather was, or his great-grandfather was. So we're talking about, this colonial implant that came from Iraq, the Jordanian monarchy, and they're enabling Hamas big time. Hamas is used to have its headquarters in Jordan, and they're aligned. So they're saying now that Iran is planning to direct its proxies from Iraq and Afghanistan with their friendly forces inside of Jordan to cross into the border with Israel in order to carry out another October 7th massacre. And why wouldn't they? I mean, look what happened with Hamas. They've only benefited from this. They're getting fed, they're fat and happy, thanks to people like Kamala Harris, who are putting out these sob stories, which are ridiculous. And it's true that there are various claims about how much aid is getting through. But how much is getting through to the hostages? None, right? How much of that medicine is getting to the hostages? Absolutely zero. We know this because there was another Qatari-mediated deal that was supposed to allow the hostages to get medications, and Israel found the medications in hospitals in Khan Yunis and other cities in Gaza. Then it was all undistributed. Nobody got anything, right? It's all a lie. They didn't get anything. And so we know none of this humanitarian aid is going to the only people who really deserve it, the only true victims in Gaza, which are the Israeli hostages who are being held there. But hey, America is massively empowering the Iranians. They're feeling good about themselves. They're saying, look, America is giving the win to Hamas. They want a UN Security Council resolution that forces Israel to stand down. They're supplying Hamas. They're forcing an Israeli defeat. They're forcing it. And so obviously we're going to do this again. That's a great idea. October 7th was the biggest victory for jihadist forces maybe ever. And why wouldn't they do it again? The Americans are inviting another further aggression. And that brings me to the north. So I was mentioning, I talked about the level of threat that we're facing in the north. And I just want to give you a little bit more data about it because it's important. I've heard estimates of from 300 to 450 kilometers of subterranean tunnels in Gaza that have been dug by Hamas using, and UNRWA, Hamas's diplomatic wing, for the past 15 years or so of Hamas rule, right? Well, we have the same situation in Iran. I'm sorry, in Lebanon. We have the same situation in Lebanon where I was writing about this already, I think before the Second Lebanon War, certainly shortly thereafter, that North Korean teams started arriving in Lebanon around the same time that North Korea was assisting Assad in Syria with his nuclear installation at Deir ez-Zor, which Israel apparently destroyed in an airstrike in 2007, in September of 2007. So around between 2006, 2007, if not earlier, we started getting sightings of North Korean forces in Lebanon. And what were they doing there? Israel, if you recall, we withdrew from Lebanon in 2000. That was an ingenious move made by perhaps the worst prime minister in Israeli history, Ehud Barak, in 2000 in May. He withdrew all Israeli forces from our security zone in South Lebanon, and Hezbollah, over the intervening years, up until and including 2008, seized control first of South Lebanon and then of all of Lebanon. And they built what had been sort of a new sense of a terrorist organization threat that Israel faced in the north into the largest strategic threat that Israel has faced arguably ever, certainly since the 73 war with the Egyptians. So we have this monstrous terror force in Lebanon, called Hezbollah. And beginning in the 2000s, we started seeing North Korean crews coming in. And what were they doing? Well, if you know much about North Korea and the DMZ, you know that North Korea is an expert at making tunnels, underground tunnels, to use to ferry forces and armaments and even vehicles through in the DMZ, and this is going back to the 1950s war in Korea. So they started appearing, and we started getting more and more reports about Hezbollah digging tunnels. And around 2016, 2017, the residents of the border communities, Avivim, Margaliot, and others started reporting that they heard Kfar Giladi, that they heard drilling underneath their floors in their beds. They're lying in bed and they hear people drilling underneath them. And, it's very alarming and what's going on. And we're worried that Hezbollah is tunneling into Israel underneath our houses. And can you imagine? And flushing the toilet and hearing digging, hearing bulldozers, hearing diggers. And so the Army started looking into it. And in 2018, they had this big thing where they exposed, I think it was 2 tunnels that traversed into kilometer into Israeli territory from Lebanon. And, the UN forces along the border, we didn't know anything about it. We'll check, right? Oh, that's really bad. And they did nothing. So now this report came out, I think, a week or 2 ago. We're facing not only a massive missile threat, but a massive tunnel threat, massive drone threat. They have surface-to-air missiles they just shot down a drone that Israel sent over to do, I don't know what, surveillance or whatever in Lebanon last week. And the last thing is that we're actually being pummeled from the north. It gets very little coverage because everybody's kind of scope locked on what's happening or not happening in Gaza and how the United States is betraying Israel in Gaza. But the threat that Hezbollah poses to Israel is orders of magnitude greater than the threat that Hamas poses. And Hamas, as we saw on October 7th, is actually an existential threat. So what we're facing from Lebanon is even worse. And they, like I said, they have the firepower. They have the ability to shoot 4,000, 5,000 missiles a day, every day, into Israel for well over a month. And, we've worried in the past that they're doing all of these strikes now in order to get us to use up all of our interceptors, because then they can just come in and we will be out of Iron Dome missiles, and what are we going to do then? But the case is that, last night Tuesday night, I think there were over 30 missiles that came in from South Lebanon in 12 different attacks. So we had 12 different attacks, and there were 35 missiles that came over into Israel the day before. There were 8 separate volleys of attacks, and also dozens of missiles are coming over into Israel. And just to get you a sense, so on Tuesday or on Monday, first of all, according to the Alma Research Center that specifically focuses on the Hezbollah threat in Lebanon, 25% of the targets that were attacked in February were civilian targets, because it's not just that they're trying to take out Israeli military positions, which they're trying to do in Northern Command and different missile posts and things like that, intelligence bases, et cetera, that they're specifically targeting. They're also specifically targeting civilian communities. So in Metula, for instance, over 100 houses have been damaged by missiles and by anti-tank rockets that are guided. And this week they targeted agricultural workers. So you have over 60,000 Israelis who have been living out in hotel rooms since they were evacuated right after October 7th. And, in northern Israel, if you've been here, you know that it's one of the most fertile agricultural regions in the country. We grow a lot of fruits there, avocados and apples and things like that. And it's famous olives. And so most of the border communities are farming communities. And with the farmers away, because they had to evacuate, who's going to till the soil? Who's going to plant the crops? Who's going to harvest the crops? So a lot of the farmers are still there, and they farm and then they go back to the hotels or whatever because you can't leave land. Anybody who farms knows that. But we also have foreign workers who are coming in to help out. So in order to destroy Israeli agriculture, on Monday, in one of the 8 volleys of attacks that Hezbollah shot over into Israel apropos nothing, they targeted agricultural workers along the border. And they murdered one 31-year-old Indian agricultural worker named Patnibin Maxwell. And he was here in Israel with his wife, who is 7 months pregnant. And in the same anti-tank attack, so that Maxwell was murdered and another 6 agricultural workers were wounded, several of them critically wounded in that attack. And so this was a deliberate, if they're deliberately targeting Northern Command, they're also deliberately targeting agricultural workers. And so that's what we saw on Monday with Hezbollah. So they want to destroy agriculture. They're destroying civilian life because 60,000 civilians were forced to leave, and they're attacking the military. So what is the American response to all of this? It's not, hey, Israel, let's help you take out the most dangerous terrorist organization in the world, right? No, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something else. Here's our plan. Our plan is to get a ceasefire with Israeli defeat in Gaza and then extend it into the north. And whereas Hamas is holding hostages, you're holding sovereign land, your own land. And we want you, in exchange for this, this deal with Hezbollah that we're trying to negotiate on your behalf, against your will, of course, but whatever, and not giving you the military supplies that you need in order to actually fight a war, which you need to do in order to survive here. We're going to offer Hezbollah your land. That's what we're going to do. So this is our deal. Our deal is you surrender to Hamas, right? You get a ceasefire in exchange for nothing, including no hostages. We're going to force this down your throat in the UN Security Council. And then once that's in place, we're going to pressure you to stand down in northern Israel as well, even though, I mean, what does it mean to stand down? Like, you're just responding to incoming fire there, right? And so you're not allowed to do that anymore. And Hezbollah won't attack you anymore, maybe. But definitely to make sure that they won't attack you anymore, give them your land. Just give it to them, because that's what they want. They just want your land. Give them Mount Dov, which controls all of northern Israel. And that'll be great. And then that'll be great. And Amos Hochstein will be a brilliant mediator, and he's going to mediate this Israeli surrender to Hezbollah, and that's going to be fantastic. So that's the American goal here. It's to betray Israel and foment an Israeli strategic defeat in a multi-front war with Iran's proxies in Lebanon and in Gaza, even in the face of a rising prospect of an invasion by other Iranian proxies from the east, coming from Iraq with Iraqi and Afghan jihadists into Israel from the Jordan border. And so that's what we're facing. So Iran is using its proxies. I mean, they don't really have an army, so they have proxies. So they're using all of their proxies to assault Israel, and the United States is surrendering to them all on Israel's dime. And so that's where we are. It's not good. It's not good. We'll have to see how we manage this, but it's quite something when the United States is, on the one hand, supposed to be Israel's greatest ally, and on the other hand, is doing absolutely everything it can to undermine Israel's ability to protect itself and to win this war for its own survival. So those are my thoughts, unfortunately, for today. But hopefully tomorrow will definitely be another day, and tomorrow will be better. Anyway, take care, and I'll talk to you about tomorrow, or next week anyway. Take care. Bye-bye.